African and Middle Eastern Christian traditions where Jesus was often portrayed with darker skin and Semitic features was suppressed. Even within Europe, there were whispers of resistance. The Eastern Orthodox Church, for example, maintained a different style of iconography, less influenced by Renaissance ideals. But the overwhelming cultural and political power of the Catholic Church ensured that its vision of Christ would dominate the Western world. Consider this: if you walk into almost any European art museum, you will see a consistent pattern of religious paintings from the Renaissance and Baroque periods. Jesus, Mary, the Apostles, all depicted with European features, often set against backgrounds that look more like Italian countryside than the rugged hills of ancient Judea. These were not just acts of creative interpretation, they were statements of cultural and racial dominance. The irony is that the Bible never emphasizes Christ's physical appearance except in symbolic language. And when it does, as in the book of Revelation, the descriptions hair like wool and feet like bronze point to an image far removed from the Western standard. Yet this truth was overshadowed by the force of art and politics. Over time, the whitewashed Jesus became so embedded in Western consciousness that alternative depictions were seen as strange or even heretical. When African and African American communities began to reclaim the image of a Black or Middle Eastern Jesus, they were often met with backlash. But this movement was not about altering scripture, it was about returning to a narrative that had been erased. One of the most telling aspects of this history is how seamlessly the image of white Jesus became tied to Western power structures. European monarchs often displayed these images in their palaces as symbols of divine favor. Missionaries carried them across oceans to distant lands, using them to civilize non-European peoples. In many ways, the face of Jesus became the face of empire. And yet history has a way of revealing its secrets. As discoveries like the Russian icons emerge, we are reminded that the story of Jesus is not confined to one race or culture. The man from Nazareth lived in a part of the world that was a crossroads of Africa, Asia, and Europe. He was born into a Jewish community that had deep ties to the African continent. This raises a crucial question for us today. Have we mistaken the image of power for the image of truth? And if we have, what does it mean to confront that reality? As we move into the next part of this journey, we will examine the historical evidence that supports the African roots of the Israelites, and how this narrative has been hidden in plain sight. Because the question is no longer just about what Jesus looked like, it's about what we've been taught to believe and why. Part 3. Scripture and the True Image. When we strip away centuries of European artistry and political manipulation, we are left with the question, what does the Bible itself say about the appearance of Christ? The scriptures, though not overly descriptive of Jesus' physical form, provide powerful clues that are impossible to ignore. One of the most striking passages comes from the book of Revelation. His head and hair were white like wool, as white as snow, and his feet were like burnished bronze, as if refined in a furnace. Revelation 1:14-15. The imagery here is vivid. The phrase hair like wool doesn't describe color alone. It evokes texture, thick, coiled, and wool-like characteristics commonly associated with African hair types. The reference to feet like burnished bronze suggests a dark, rich, metallic tone, again pointing to a complexion far from pale or fair. This is not an isolated reference. In the book of Daniel 10:6, a similar description appears. His body was like beryl, his face like lightning, his eyes like flaming torches, his arms and legs like the gleam of burnished bronze. These descriptions emphasize a glowing, radiant, but unmistakably darker tone. Yet throughout history, these verses have been overlooked or minimized in Western theological traditions, while artistic depictions have leaned toward European aesthetics. But Jesus was a first-century Jew born in the region of Judea, a crossroads of Africa, Asia, and the Middle East. It is historically implausible for him to have had the Northern European features we see in much of Western art. The people of ancient Israel, particularly during the time of Jesus, were Semitic, with darker skin tones ranging from olive to deep brown. The land of Israel, situated at the gateway to Africa, had long been influenced by African migrations and intermarriages, particularly with regions such as Egypt, Ethiopia, and Sudan. To truly understand this, we need to explore the ancient Jewish identity and its African connections. Historically, the Israelites were closely tied to Africa. The patriarch Abraham traveled through Egypt. Moses led the Hebrews out of slavery in Egypt, a land of dark-skinned people. Zipporah, the wife of Moses, is described in Scripture as a Cushite woman. Numbers 12:1. Cush being an ancient term referring to Nubia or modern-day Sudan. Even in the New Testament we find references to African believers. Simon of Cyrene, who carried Jesus' cross, was from North Africa. These cultural and genealogical connections paint a very different picture of early Israel than the one popularized in European art. The Israel of the Bible was not an isolated, pale-skinned society, but a dynamic, multi-ethnic community rooted in the broader African and Middle Eastern world. This leads us to a larger question. If the scriptures hint at a darker, more historically accurate image of Jesus and his people, why has this truth been erased for centuries? Part of the answer lies in how history is written and by whom. As Christianity spread through Europe, the centers of power, Rome, Constantinople, later Paris, and London, gradually took control of how religious narratives were depicted. By the time of the Renaissance, the visual language of Christianity had been fully reshaped to suit European tastes and political interests. A white Jesus was not only theologically convenient, but also socially reinforcing. It aligned the divine with the ruling classes and justified colonial expansion as a civilizing mission.